Hello. Well, in the August or so of 2001, 9 years ago, I remember driving down I.C.U and seeing a billboard which showed this sort of like a slot, like a mail slot or something, and it was somebody on the other side glaring at you, one kind of milky eye, like there was a cataract or something growing over it. The other sort of lanky, greasy black hair, and some sort of mask on the lower part of the face, but you couldn't really see much of it because you only saw the very top of the nose had a little bit of something covering it, and it was sort of glaring at you with the one good eye through that slot, a metal slot, like perhaps the slot where they'll feed you little scraps of God knows what if you're in a dungeon in prison somewhere, or perhaps if you are in a padded cell in a mental institution, they might look at you through an observation slot or something, or whatever strange thing, and glaring at you as the sinister figure. And then written underneath were 3 letters like initials, I.C.U. And I thought, intensive care unit, and then I realized, oh no, it's a pun. I see you. Oh, I see. So this was meant for Halloween Horror Nights 11. This was the billboard that went up there right next to that little Days Inn on near Kirkman on I thought, well, it always has the Halloween Horror Nights billboard. Well, that was fun. Ooh, that sounds exciting. Is this what they're doing to Top Jack? Oh boy. And of course I went online and found a little scrap of a website, not much, saying something about, it doesn't matter where you hide or what you do, he sees you. I think there was something about no more clowning around, or say goodbye to Jack, something along those lines. And it was like, oh, I see, they're going to go one step beyond an evil clown. They're going to get really frickin' scary this year. I was really excited. Now, since that time, I've learned an awful lot about what actually happened before the event of Halloween Horror Nights 11, I.C.U. A lot of, but more recently, this year, 2010, while attending sessions in the VIP lounge at Halloween Horror Nights 20 Years of Fear, I found out a whole lot more stuff I had never known about. Much more details and very interesting information about what went on leading up to the events of 2001. And so it seems a bit fortuitous that I didn't get around to making these videos about that event until now, in November, after Halloween Horror Nights 20 is over, that I've received this new information for you. Because otherwise I wouldn't have known all of it, and I wouldn't have been able to pass it on to those of you who weren't able to go to the event this year, or if you did, were too cheap to pay the $10 to get in the VIP lounge. Anyway. So, let us then proceed. As it turns out, long before that billboard went up on I-4, before I had any idea what was going to happen, back in the day, what was going on behind the scenes in the sinister dungeons of terror known as art and design at Universal Studios. Those trained gnomes and mysterious sinister figures they have chained to their desks, while this big evil burly man with a whip forces them to draw and create things. Whoop-pack, whoop-pack. Yes. Yes, master. I'll draw a clown for you now. Yes, you like it. Well, it's my imagination. I've actually met these people. They're really nice fellows, and they probably got a kick out of that. But that's what I'd like to think is going on in A&D. Some guy with a black hood over his head, making them create nightmares for him. Well, anyway, they had a really cool idea, a brilliant idea, which they would eventually use. But back in 2001, they already had the idea. And that was, well, we just opened this awesome new theme park called Islands of Adventure, and it's like the hot thing that's going on right now. We have Universal Studios Florida, where we've had Halloween Horror Nights now for 10 years, and over here is Islands of Adventure. Why don't this year, 2001, as we go into the 21st century, we use both parks simultaneously for an expanded Halloween Horror Nights? Wow, it uses two-park experience, and we can call it the Scream Park. Bigger than, so big it can't, one theme park can't contain. It's the Scream Park. Yeah. And the idea was to use part of Universal Studios Florida and part of Islands of Adventure, not the whole either, not all of both parts, but part of both, and have this thing. Of course, for whatever reason, they weren't able to pull that off in 2001. But as you probably are aware, 3 years later in 2004, they were able to get this two-part concept going in that year's event. Although, interestingly enough, it was a different part of each park that they ended up using. Well, they always had to have the sound stages in there, but some of the parts of IOA and USO that they used weren't exactly the same parts that they had originally concepted. But enough of that. So that was the idea, and they wanted to come up with a really awesome, iconic figure that would top Jack, because they had Jack the year before. Now, how do we top this? Now, how we got this clown? And what I also learned in the VIP lounge is that the real origins of Jack, going beyond what I mentioned in the previous videos that I made before I attended it, is that they actually did some survey stuff. They had one of those what do you call them? Those groups, where they get a bunch of people in and they give them questionnaires, focus groups. Yeah. So they had focus groups, a number of them, and they'd ask people, "What scares you?" And what kept coming up in the year 2000 was clowns, and so that's where they got the. Let's go with that. So that was the real origin, was that for actual scares, actual fears of actual people, is where it came from. Now, isn't that interesting? Because they kept coming up. It was like there were clowns in the zeitgeist. And as TJ pointed out in the VIP lounge, there weren't any actual big clown movies that year. I mean, there'd been some a few years earlier, but in 2000, where did this come from in the zeitgeist? Why was it out in everyone's mind at that time? And that was part of it. And I also didn't know that James Keaton, who used to work with me at the Adventurers Club years ago, and the Comedy Warehouse Adventurers Club was in those two clubs when I used to work back and forth, and I would go to the Adventurers Club, he'd be there. When he first started as Jack the Clown, I didn't know this. They sent him out into downtown Orlando and had him terrorize downtown Orlando without telling anybody who they were or what they were doing. And so he nearly got arrested a couple of times. He attacks Mayor Glenda Hood's office. He goes into Channel 9 News. And there is some interesting pictures of him sort of just hanging out in Lake Eola, freaking out any people who would see this clown. But the swans, those black Australian swans that are hanging out in Lake Eola, just sort of look at him, clown, because they've seen weird clowns lurking in the park before, or at least they've seen a lot of weird shit in that park. I'm sure evil clown's nothing to them. So it's like going off being a swan. So we have it there. So they did a focus group thing again in the year 2001, early on, to see what was scaring people that year. And again, weirdly enough, it was like the same answers kept coming up. It's like there's something floating in the collective unconscious that tells people what's scary that year or something. I don't know. But what was getting to people in 2001 were being stared at by these weird people looking at them. It was this idea of eyes and staring at them in the dark and looking at them and seeing them. And this idea was like, okay, so they got the idea of this thing, and that's where they came up with the whole I.C.U. You know, so it sort of came from that. But they wanted to come up with an iconic figure. What would it be? And so they sort of had the idea of taking someone who was like a horror movie iconic character and combining them into this thing. You know, a little bit of Hannibal Lecter muzzle, a little bit of Michael Myers evil, creepy type thing, a little bit of, you know, leather face with a chainsaw, maybe a little bit of that Jason feeling, all of that sort of in one person who was like a fanatical horror movie fan, who all of these are in his mind, and he finally snaps, you know, idea. And they had the idea this would be Edgar Sawyer, but then they had would be the name of the character, but who was he really? And they had this really nifty idea of how to create him. But before I get there, there was an idea they threw away, right? Because I'm starting to talk about Eddie, but before we get to Eddie, they had another idea they threw away I have to mention, because it was so damn silly. When they had that Scream Park concept, they said, okay, well, who would rule over the Scream Park? And their first idea was, well, at least an idea that was thrown at them, because they don't have always good ideas, was, well, let's see, we'll have a character that embodies Islands Adventure and Universal Studios. And so he'll be like half and half. And the Universal Studios will be Jack the Clown that we had there before. And the other side, Islands Adventure, will be like the new, extreme, but like punk, 21st century, you know, tattoos and piercings dude who would be like the Islands Adventure. Horror, whatever. And so they had this dude that was like split down the middle with Jack the Clown on one side and this sort of, I don't know what you call it, looked like a biker or something with like piercings all over and like kind of dirty looking, you know, type of guy on one side, and it looked stupid. So obviously that's why they didn't use it. And then they didn't do the two-park thing, so of course they didn't use it. But they had some nifty ideas in the script. Of course, before they, you know, they dropped that character before they dropped the two-park concept, and they started working on this character for the event before they dropped the Scream Park concept. They were still working on the character that became Eddie. So he was going to be the Lord of the Scream Park. He was going to be the new icon that takes over everything. So the first idea that this Edgar Sawyer fellow was that he was Jack. How you top Jack? Well, actually what's going to happen is Jack the Clown takes his makeup, his mask, his thing off, and underneath is this Eddie, okay, is Edgar, whatever he's going to be. And he's going to be the new horror creature. And it was underneath Jack all along. Now this is the extreme horror that comes out. No more clowning around. Now I'm getting real with you bastards. That was the idea, but that didn't work out so well, and then a problem came up with the name of Edgar Sawyer. Now Sawyer, you know, because he had a chainsaw, Sawyer happens to be the surname of the characters in the original classic Texas Chainsaw Massacre series. It isn't mentioned in the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but by part 2, which came out in 1985, Tobe Hooper came up with the name Sawyer for the last name for these guys. Leatherface's name was Bubba Sawyer. Now you're thinking, well, isn't it like Tommy, starts with an H. I forget what the hell the name is in the new reboot series off the top of my head, and I'll probably remember it if I think about it hard enough, but I don't want to waste time because I only have 1 minute. But, you know, there's two, the names are different of the family, but originally it was Sawyer, and it fits in with, you know, Tom Sawyer, but also Sawyer. Yeah, dumb, but that's our idea. So Edgar Sawyer, but there's a problem. You see, remember I told you about Seagram's. Now Seagram's had Universal, and it was Seagram's was purchased by Vivendi. Now Edgar Bronfman Jr., the head of Seagram's, was still was the vice president of this new Vivendi Universal company. He had been CEO before, but now he was still one of the main executives. So you don't name your monster after the boss. That's how come the name Edgar was dropped, essentially. Alright, we'll continue this with the next one. It's now just